Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Pigman by Paul Zindel, chapters 3 and 4, the beginning of the rising action and the conflicts of the story. Let's take a look at what we can learn from these two chapters. So now that we're heading into the rising action, we need to know what to look for. Just a reminder, the rising action is the part of the story that builds toward the climax by adding conflict to the story. Every story has conflict, and the conflicts keep building upon each other. The more problems that occur, the bigger the conflict should get until we get to that turning point in the story. And once we know what we need to know to understand the story, which is the exposition, we should know that the conflicts will make the story more interesting. If the story was just exposition, nothing exciting would happen. Some conflict types include character versus character, character versus self, character versus society, and character versus the unknown/nature. Those are technically different categories, but nature and unknown can be similar. We want to be looking for all these types of conflicts since most novels will have all of them, although some will be more important than others. And just in case you'd like a visual, we're in the rising action, which is here. So you'll notice that now we're starting to slope up on that line, and you'll notice it keeps rising until we get to the climax, because once again, all those problems should impact each other and make bigger problems. So we're going to start seeing how the story is going to get more intense and create more difficulties for our characters. So let's start looking at those rising actions and other things we can find in chapters 3 and 4. First of all, our inciting incident is that telephone marathon and Lorraine's phone call to Mr. Pigmani. We get to see how those characters first meet, and that's interesting to us as readers, because it seems like something small and simple that's clearly going to lead to something worthy of a memorial epic. And we want to make sure we note this, that the prank call alone counts as an automatic conflict, because if we're talking about a prank phone call, you only make those if you're trying to create some problems. We're also starting to look for our antagonist or antagonists, who are going to be our bad guys for this story, or at least, and I should rephrase that, because antagonists don't have to be bad guys, they just need to create conflict. And right now, we really don't know if Mr. Pigmani is going to be the antagonist, and so we'll talk more about him as the story progresses. We get a little glimpse of him in chapters 3 and 4. Now, the only other two characters we might want to look at are Dennis and Norden. Lorraine mentions that John and Lorraine don't really like Dennis and Norden. In fact, John hates Norden. So this is all interesting to us and could be useful in determining our antagonist. And speaking of conflicts, I hope you noticed the cliffhangers at the end of both chapters 3 and 4. I assume Paul Zindel left those there to make you predict you want to read further, but they definitely create some conflict and some suspense for our characters. For chapter 3, John ending that chapter with the phrase, "not murdered him," puts murder into the equation, makes us wonder what could have happened to Mr. Pigmani that could be qualifying as murder. And for chapter 4, where it says John will end up complicating everything, we need to wonder what could John possibly do to make a prank telephone call get into such a way that it could be an epic. And what do we know about Mr. Pigmani? Well, we don't know much yet. He's a man that John and Lorraine meet by coincidence, and his characteristic so far is that he's very happy and has a good sense of humor. He's married, and he's lonely, at least according to Lorraine's perspective or perception of him. So we'll have to look more into Mr. Pigmani as we go. We've just met him and are starting to get our info on this character, who is the title character, so he has to be important to the story. So let's go ahead and make some advanced inferences for this story, especially since it's the start of the story. We want to start thinking about what's going on. First of all, why does Lorraine narrate this chapter? I told you to ask this question at the end of each chapter, and when I say this chapter, I'm referring to chapter 4. And in this case, we want to have the character that makes the phone call be the one that's on the other end and telling us what's going on in the story. If John were narrating this chapter, then we wouldn't know what's going on during Lorraine's phone call unless Lorraine tells him through dialogue. To add to that, Lorraine is the one with all the psychological know-how. She's able to identify that Mr. Pigmani is lonely, and that gives us an idea of what to expect if we meet him later or hear from him later or whatever may happen. I also want to note that if you were really paying attention, you may have noticed that Mr. Pigmani knows it is a prank phone call, which goes with Lorraine's idea that he might be lonely and just wanting to talk to somebody. For instance, Lorraine stumbles when trying to figure out the name of the charity, and she laughs uncontrollably, and there's a pause by Mr. Pigmani, and then he continues to talk as if nothing was wrong. That's probably the sign that he figured this out. And to add to that, he donates $69.21, or sorry, we should rephrase that. He donates $10 knowing it's not a real call and not a real charity, which is worth $69.21, at least in 2016. That's a pretty large amount of money to give to somebody when they don't actually seem to be a real charity. And that could be an interesting note to make and could lead your mind going in different directions as you get to chapter 5 and 6. Now, how will the conflict increase? Well, first of all, John wants the money from Mr. Pigmani because it is a lot of money, and if that's the case, he's going to try to get it to help him get things he wants, including alcohol, things like that. And also note, once again, predict what's going to happen next. If John wants that money, he's going to try to convince Lorraine to go to the house, and it is chapter 5 next, so John's going to be the one telling us all about it. Now, you may not have noticed this because a lot of students look at character versus character, sometimes character versus self, and they might miss things that are in the background. We already have a lot of family conflict in the story. John and Lorraine's families aren't ideal for them. For instance, for John, he calls his father the boar, his mom the old lady. These people are not clearly people he enjoys, and since they are labeled as such, we should know there's a conflict there. And likewise, as we already talked about in Chapter 2, Lorraine's mom is critical of her, and that's not going to be ideal for her either, as someone who's insecure, quiet, and shy. Now, we should also note that these conflicts are in here because this is a young adult novel, and as teenagers reading the story, you'd be able to relate to this as a young adult reader. So these kind of conflicts should jump out at you, and you should also consider them as potential main conflicts in the story, since John and Lorraine will interact with their families constantly throughout the story and reference back to them frequently as they are narrating what's going on with Mr. Pignotti. And that's it for this slideshow. If you have any questions, always contact me. But thanks for watching.